Welcome to the Foundry, where we're all about a better you and a better world. My name is Seth, and I will be your host for the evening. Everyone do this real quick. Let me see if you've got all 10. None were lost last night due to some firework mishaps. Everybody's good? Okay, yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that. That makes me a bit more at peace, a bit more at calm. I'm so very glad you're here. I want to give a big shout out to Mr. Joseph Q. Robinson, who lead worship, who did a great job last week. Big shout out to him for stepping up and giving us step 11 of the series that we're in. I'm so grateful to him. I'm grateful for Joe, grateful for his heart, I'm grateful for his insight, I'm grateful for his wisdom. Such a huge blessing as a part of this staff. I'm so grateful for him. Last week, because Joe was preaching, we took our family vacation and it was awesome. Jess and I took the kids to North Carolina up near Asheville. We found this Airbnb. It was on 160 acres of mountain. It was awesome, and we just ran through the woods for 3 or 4 days and jumped in some creeks and swam in the rivers, and it was amazing. I have poison ivy on my foot, so if you see me doing this, it's okay, just go with it. I'm trying to heal that, but it's all good. So we are in step 12, and we wrap up this series. It's a big day, 12 weeks we've been going through. If you're new here, if you're new online, if you haven't seen us, you can catch back up. There's 11 other weeks of content online at thefoundryc.org/watch. You can find it there and catch up. So what we've been doing is going through the 12 steps, like AA, Celebrate Recoveries type stuff, and been looking at the theology and the wisdom of the 12-step program. So it's been pretty awesome. And I don't know about you, but to me, this has been very fitting. It's been very on point with the world that we find ourselves living in and struggles. And I personally have been challenged and moved by it, and I hope that you have done the same as well. Next week, we begin a brand new series that we're calling Mind Over Matter, which I'm very excited about. It's going to be 4 weeks, and essentially we're talking about how changing your thinking will change your life. And so I figured, still, with everything that's happening in our world today, everything that we're facing, everything we're dealing with, this would be a very fitting series for us to begin to walk through. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that sort of thing. So it's going to be really good. Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, thank you. So you haven't heard it, but I appreciate the support in advance. So step 12, we wrap up today. So what is step 12? We'll look at AA and we'll look at Celebrate Recovery. It's very similar. Here's step 12 according to AA. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Celebrate Recovery says it this way: having had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and practice these principles in all of our affairs. Galatians 6:1, brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore them gently, but watch yourself or you may also be tempted. So this step, there's a lot in this step, if you caught all that. There's a lot going on. Having had a spiritual experience as a result to these steps. Because we've walked through these steps, it's led us to a particular spiritual awakening. And now that you've had that experience, we want to try to help others have that same experience as well. Right? Maybe you could say it this way. My practice of these steps has transformed me, and because I have been transformed, I want to help transform others. Now, real quick, by the way, there's a big difference between transforming somebody and helping somebody transform, right? Transforming somebody is like walking behind the donkey with a stick and smacking it to try to get it to go in a particular direction, even though it doesn't want to. Helping somebody to transform is like leading the donkey with the carrot and helping them get to the better place. It's very difficult to force somebody to transform. In fact, I would say it's nearly impossible. Nothing changes if nothing changes, and sometimes people don't want to change. So, the idea here is I've experienced this transformation. I've gone through this spiritual experience, and it's incredible. And part of your growth as you continue in this journey, because it's always a journey, it's always process. Remember, it's not perfection, it's process. It's process, it's steps. It's one step at a time, one day after the next. Part of your continued growth will be to help others in their journey of transformation. Maybe you've heard this said before, hurt people hurt people. I think the same is true in the positive. Transformed people transform people. Healed people heal people. Loved people love people. It's this whole idea that you've experienced a better way. And because you've experienced a better way, you now want to help others experience the same thing. It's like waking up from the Matrix, right? I know that's a dated reference, I get that. But I realized halfway through this sermon that I had like 4 movie references, so I just went with it. Okay, so just go with it. Sometimes it's okay. So it's like the Matrix. He wakes up from the cycle, he wakes up from being plugged in, and then he realizes what's happening, and then his natural response is to want to help others, set others free as well, right? In fact, if you consider the process of the 12 steps, and if you want to take the thought to like the next level in how you think about this, what you see through the 12 steps is really the pattern of Christ. If you look at the 12 steps, what this is, you see this Christological pattern that's built into the whole thing. When you think about it, how does the whole thing begin in step 12? It begins with admitting your powerlessness, which is what? To die to the self, which is to admit that I need help, which is to admit that I am not in fact God and that I need some intervention. You die to the self, and then you go through this process, the death, the burial, and the resurrection. You get to step 12. You should have gone through this spiritual experience, this moment of awakening, this resurrection, this stepping into new life. So step 12 is you've experienced this, and now you're bringing this experience that you've had to others, which, by the way, is exactly what Christ did himself, isn't it? When he was put to death and then buried and then resurrected, and then he said to you, to us, to all of us, hey, I want to invite you to do this thing that I've already set the example of. And so we walk through this process of death, burial, and resurrection, the stepping into new life. And then he tells us, hey, you should invite others to do the same. Right? It's this ongoing cycle. It's this ongoing cycle of giving and receiving, giving and receiving. It's this idea that if we are all doing the thing that we've been called to do, which is this idea of giving of ourselves, if we are all giving of ourselves, then we should all also be receiving from one another, which means then as a collective humanity, we should all be moving forward towards a deeper, more integrated, more holistic way of being. In fact, another word for this might be, another term for this, you could call it like the good news, that we're all moving forward. Now, let's talk about this idea of spiritual awakening, because I think this is important. Because ultimately, isn't that kind of the goal? Like in everything we're doing here, when it comes to church and faith, isn't the goal this spiritual awakening? You might not like that term. Spiritual maturity, spiritual growth, whatever you want to call it. That at one time, wherever you were, wherever you are currently, there was this guy, Jesus, who showed up onto the scene, and he offered this salvation, and he offers a better way to live, which I believe actually work hand in hand. And it's through Jesus, this idea that we have this, even the thought of a spiritual awakening. Think about the language of the Bible. I once was lost, but now am found. I once was blind, now I see. I once was dead, but now I've been raised to new life. This is all language of spiritual awakening, right? The basis of spiritual awakening, you could say the basis of a good spirituality even, it contains 2 major components, okay? And these 2 major components, I believe, have to work together. They have to work in unison, in conjuncture. They have to be happening simultaneously in order for us to experience this spiritual awakening. Both of these major components are surrounded by and connected directly to this idea of freedom, okay? And I'll explain this here in a minute. The idea of God must be free and you must be free. And when these 2 things come together at the same time, then you will experience this spiritual awakening, this spiritual maturity, this growth in your faith. So, let me explain this a little bit when it comes to each of these components. When it comes to this idea of God being free, freedom for God, what does that even mean? Well, I think when it comes to how we think of God, a lot of us have a lot of parameters. We have a lot of parameters that we use to define how we think of God. We've built these little boxes that we can then put God in, and then we interact with God as we understand Him in the box that we created. You see, when you bind God, which, by the way, you aren't actually binding God. You don't have that kind of power. You're only binding how you think about God. When you bind how you think about God, then God is not free in your mind. God is always free, but God is not free in your mind. And you have when you have this highly limited perception and understanding of God, you have a highly limited perception and understanding of how God can operate. And when you maintain a limited, confined picture and understanding of God, then your spiritual growth, the maturing of your faith, the deepening of your relationship will be difficult to come to because God is not free in your mind. And if God is not free in your mind, then you are not free to experience the fullness of who God is. You see? So spiritual awakening comes when God is free, and it comes when you are free, and this happens simultaneously. So now when it comes to your freedom will come when you are able to live and be without constraint. And what do we mean by that? We're not talking about lawlessness. We're not talking about free-for-all. We're not talking about just do as you wish. We're not talking about anarchy. We're talking about freedom from the constraints of things like sin. Freedom from constraints of addiction. Freedom from the constraints of a low self-worth. From the constraints of giving your self-value based on what you can and cannot do. Freedom from the constraint of defining yourself based on your success or failure. The constraint of making your identity about how much money you have in the bank account. The constraint of needing others to approve of you in order to find some sort of self-worth. True freedom for us is when you're able to step out and away from these things, when you are able to be secure enough in the self and secure enough in your relationship with God that you are not constrained by the world around you. You're free to step into the life that you were created to have. I mean, doesn't that sound nice? Because you know what that is? Like, when you experience freedom the way that I believe we were created to experience freedom, it's like this. It's like, it's like a sigh of relief. It's like relaxing of the shoulders. It's, I don't have to. It's like you look around at the world and you realize that the world is playing a particular game. And what you've noticed in this game that the world is playing is that this game seems to be a bit damaging, and it seems to be a bit draining, and it seems to be exhausting, and it seems to be a bit dangerous. And you realize that it's a game, and you've gone, you know what? I don't want to play that I don't want to play that anymore. I don't want to do that. The truth is, I think, that we don't do well with freedom. Christians, I don't think, do well with freedom. We sing about freedom, we talk about freedom, we talk about being set free, but I'm not sure that we actually know what we're talking about when we talk about it. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, I think most people would prefer to be somewhat confined than we actually would to step into the kind of freedom that Jesus actually offers. It's like space. You ever watch, this is another movie reference, you ever watch any space movies and see people floating in space and feel like anxious or nervous and get like a pit in your stomach, like, oh my gosh, space is forever? Our brains can't process infinity. Our brains can't process forever. It shuts down. There was a movie a while back called Gravity. Do you remember this one? Sandra Bullock and George Clooney. Who doesn't love George Clooney? You know what I'm saying? He's easy on the eyes. He's a great actor. So they're in space, and there's a couple moments in the movie where they're like outside of their vehicles and whatever. In one particular scene, they're working on the space station or whatever it is they're at. They're outside the vehicle. They're just in their suits in outer space, and then something hits the thing they're working. I'm not going to ruin it. No spoilers here. And then she gets like the whole thing like explodes somehow, and then she gets sent off into space, and her tether breaks, and then she's sent like flipping over and over, and just like you see a shot, and it's just this single body flipping through space, and they zoom in on her helmet, and she's breathing heavy, and it makes you panic. It made me panic on the inside, and you just have the thought, like, if somebody doesn't rescue her, she's just going on forever, like. And then eventually her air is going to run out. I don't want to get too morbid. Her air is going to run out, and then she's going to keep flipping and floating into space. And there's something about this thought about the vastness, the immenseness of the universe that kind of makes me a bit unsettled. The immenseness of the universe, I think, gives us this like low-grade anxiety, like, oh my gosh, we don't know what's out there. What will ever happen? I think the freedom that Jesus actually invites us to is a bit like space. It's a thing that's bigger and better and deeper and wider and richer and more freeing than we could ever possibly imagine. But I think like space, we find the vastness of this freedom a bit unnerving. And I think if I'm going to be like brutally honest here, I think most of the people, I think many Christians, although we would never say it out loud, we don't know what to do with the freedom that Christ offers. And I think there's a bit of fear and anxiety when it comes to actually being free. It's like in The Shawshank Redemption. Remember that movie? Yeah, Shawshank, what a great movie. You remember there's the old guy that goes by the name of Brooks, and he's been in prison most of his life, and he finally gets set free, and he goes and he gets this new job, and he gets an apartment by himself, and the world has changed so much since he's been in. It's moving fast-paced, and now he has all the freedom in the world, and he doesn't know what to do with it, and he eventually takes his own life. Brooks was here. He doesn't know what to do with the freedom. It's too much. It's too much. He couldn't adjust to it. I think this is how we often respond. Rather than stepping into this continued freedom and experiencing it in greater and greater ways each and every day, we begin to create more rules and laws and codes that we have to live by because we like the constraint. We actually have an example of this in the Old Testament. If you go back into the book of Exodus, you see the story of the liberation of God's people. They've been enslaved for something like 400 years. They cry out to God. God hears their cry. He sends Moses to rescue them. Moses rescues them. They take their journey out into the desert. They're out there for a couple of months or something, and then all of a sudden, the people begin to get a bit upset. Exodus chapter 16, watch what happens. Exodus 16. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and we ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." So 400 years of slavery, they're given freedom. They're given this opportunity to work with God in establishing a whole new kind of community. They're given the opportunity not only to be free, but to establish a whole new way of being, to create a whole new kind of community, to work with God in this freedom. And they go, "Yeah, but you know what? I kind of liked it better back there." Right? I think we're afraid to be free because we won't know what to do with ourselves. At least we think we won't know what to do with ourselves. And then that makes us nervous. And that's why so many people, we maintain, we adhere, we like the religious institutions that we see in our world because they tell us where to go. They tell us what to believe. They tell us what God is like. They tell us, here's what the Bible says. Don't worry about it yourself. I'll just listen to me. I'll point you the right way. It's easier that way, isn't it? Just tell me where to go. It gives us a sense of belonging, a sense of stability. It gives us a sense of like we have some security underneath our feet. It's easier that way. Freedom can be a bit scary because who's going to tell me what to do? Watch what Paul says in Galatians 5, verse 1. "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Why did Christ set us free? So that you could be free. What was he up to when he came to set us free? He was up to wanting you to experience a new kind of freedom. Not so that you could make up a whole bunch of rules and regulations in order to put yourself in a different box that you will eventually need rescue from. He came so that you would have freedom. So when we don't live in the freedom that he came to offer, then we are rejecting the very thing that he came for. No. I don't want to venture out into the wilderness. I want to go back to Egypt. When we don't step into the freedom that he came to offer, then we are rejecting the very thing he came to do. Think about that for like a decade or two. Oh, well, I'm free. Are you? Are you free from fear? Because what it looks like in our current climate of the world, it looks like there's a whole lot of fear in our country. It looks like there's a whole lot of fear in the church and amongst Christians. It looks like there's a lot of panic. You're not free. What about worry? Have you worried about anything this week? Pretty sure the scripture also says, like, Jesus says, don't worry about these things. Like, don't worry about what you will eat, what you will drink, what you will wear. Did you worry? Isn't that the thing he said he was coming to? You've been set free so that you could be free from things like worry. What about hatred? Well, I don't hate anybody, Seth. I'm a Christian. Okay, get over yourself, first of all. Second of all, have you strongly disliked somebody this week? Have you seen somebody on the news or seen somebody post something that you didn't agree with that really made your blood boil on the inside? Now, you might not have unleashed it. Have you lost your temper at all? Yeah. Then then you're not free. You're not free. He came to free you from all this. Had you compared yourself to anybody this week? Have any of your addictions got the best of you this week? Well, I'm not an addict. Oh, okay. You just keep committing the same secret sin over and over again? I didn't realize you were so much better than the rest of us. It's still not free. It's for freedom that Christ has set you free. It's for freedom that Christ has set you free. It's for freedom that Christ has set you free. Have you been critical of yourself, of your physical body this week? Oh, my hair is getting grayer, my pants are getting tighter, I got an extra roll here or there. Then you're not free. Do you see what I'm saying? Like all this stuff. Spiritual awakening comes when you're able to come to the place where in your mind you are allowing God to be God, that you are allowing God to be free and do and operate as God is, where you have not put any parameters or constraints upon who God is, and at the same time, you yourself are able to let go of all the things in this life that are putting constraints upon you. And when these two great freedoms align, when they come together simultaneously, this is where the magic happens. This is where the spiritual awakening, the growth, the spiritual maturity, this is where you get a new glimpse of how the world is and who God is and your place in it. You see, but here's the thing with all this. This is never like a one-time thing. This is never like a one and done sort of thing. This is a process. It's a little by little, step by step. It can be very difficult step to get to. It can be very difficult to get to the place where you're able to allow God to be free and where you're able to allow yourself to be free. And once you get there, you will have this moment, this awakening. But it doesn't mean that you've got it all figured out. It doesn't mean that you're all done. It means you have this moment. And you value this moment, you learn from this moment, but then you keep moving forward. Because in this moment, when those things align, you taste something, you see something, you experience something. And once you've seen, you can't unsee. And once you've tasted, you can't untaste. You can't go back to where you were. Now, you may have a lapse, you may have a slip, you may have a fall, you may have a meltdown occasionally, but once you've experienced this awakening, this new way of being, this new freedom, typically you'll want to keep moving forward. The reality about addiction, the reality about sin, to me is that they're really birthed from like the same place. They're both birthed out of desire. They're both birthed out of lacking. Here's what I mean. I think built into each and every one of us is this desire to be connected to the Creator, the one who has breathed into us the very breath of life, the one who is the source of our being. And so there is this thing that is built within us to connect with and to commune with the divine that has created. And so when we are not connected, when we are not in communion with our Creator, then there is something lacking within us. And it's this lacking within us, this lack of being connected to the source of all life. When we experience the lacking, we will begin to search for something to fill that void. Sin and addiction are indicators that something is off. They're indicators that we are searching. The reality is we're always searching. Whether people choose to believe it or not, if you're a human being, then you are a spiritual being. As a spiritual being, you are searching for that which will fulfill, that which will enlighten, that which will make complete. You will be searching for that which will connect you to your Creator. And so sin and addiction are indicators that we haven't reached the depth of our connection in our Creator, in that relationship, the way that our soul was meant to live and be, the experience that our soul was meant to have. Right? So, and this is kind of a different way to think about things like sin and addiction. Like not just as this moral failure or this inherent evil, but rather as evidence of spiritual beings who have veered off the path on their journey in their search for their Creator. Think about that for a second. Right? It's not just that maybe I'm this inherently evil sort of being. It's that there's something within me that's searching for the Creator, that's searching for communion and oneness with the God who created me. And I haven't yet figured out what that is, or somebody hasn't shown me what that is. And so now I'm searching for all these things to try to fill that void. I read the other day that in the Hebrew Bible, right, the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, that there's really only one sin. Well, there's all the rules. Yeah. There's really only one sin. That one sin is the sin of idolatry. That is making something God that is not God. I love this thought. I love this thought, especially in light of what we just said about thinking about sin and addiction not just as moral failure, but as thinking of sin and addiction as evidence of spiritual beings who have veered off the path in search for their Creator. So there's this idea of one sin, idolatry, making something God that is not God. Isn't this what is happening with sin, with addiction? Right? This is exactly what's happening. I'm looking for my connection, my communion with the divine, but I haven't yet figured that out. And so I get distracted by things like money. Maybe if I get enough money, then that will fulfill me and meet the need. It won't. That's why you can have all the money in the world and still feel alone and like you don't have enough meaning or purpose, or you can still feel like you're lacking. Maybe you're pursuing things like popularity, maybe things like sex, drugs, rock and roll, all the evils. These things are not God. These things we're elevating them as if they are. We put this thing on the platform, and if I can just get that, then that will satisfy. And what this step 12 stuff is about is like, no, you're missing the bigger point. You're missing the bigger point. Psalms 15 talks about idols like this. Watch what it says. I think this is interesting. But their idols are silver and gold, made by human hands. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear, noses but cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel, feet but cannot walk, nor can they utter a sound with their throats. Let me peer around the drum enclosure. Those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. When you make something God other than God, then you will become like the thing that you made to be your God. And that thing that you made to be your God, because it was made by you, cannot ultimately save you. It cannot bring you spiritual enlightenment. It cannot rescue you. And ultimately, it cannot provide the deep connection to your Creator that you were searching for in the first place. So maybe the thought would be like, maybe we should stop spending all this time worshiping and pursuing all these various gods, little g type gods that cannot save you. You see, the real problem with sin and addiction is not that God is keeping a list and checking it twice and trying to see who's naughty and who's nice. I think the real problem with it is that they actually deny you as the addict, as the sinner. They deny you or prevent you from experiencing the deep and simple joy of life that you were created to have by God. They deny you. They keep you from experiencing God's intended reality, the way you were supposed to live, which is in a deeply connected relationship to your Creator, which is in a deeply committed, connected relationship with your Creator that allows you to see the beauty and the presence and the wonder of God in absolutely everything. And not only just to see it, but to be fulfilled by it, and then to want to be able to share it with others. When we were in the mountains this past week, with the kids, it was just so beautiful. Not only was it beautiful, like just being there, but being with the kids and walking through creation and just spending that time. It felt very complete. We weren't worried about money, schedules, time, bills. We were connected with one another as a family. We felt like we were connected to God through the creation, seeing everything that He had made, marveling at the beauty, swimming in the river, in the cold, refreshing river during the summer sun, enjoying that time. There was this sense of completeness and awe that we were able to experience. There was a moment the other day where it was raining, so we have this property and this, like, we're trying to grow vegetables and stuff, and so it hadn't rained very, very much in the past week or so, and so it rained like on Thursday or whatever it was, had a pretty good rain. And so I've grown to love the rain. I loved the rain before because it was a good weather to nap in, and I love naps, but I've grown to love the rain even more because I'm like, oh, my plants need all this rain. And so we were at the house, and Jess was at work, and I was working on dinner with the kids, and it started raining, and I started singing, just like making up songs. We are grateful for the rain. And so my youngest son, Elias, who is just a ball of fire, he just started singing along with me, like as he's helping me to do stuff in the kitchen. He's like, and I'm grateful for the peanut butter. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good one, man. Like, you know, like, so these are the little moments. This is the beauty and the joy and the simplicity of life, that I'm not worried about these other things. I'm not trying to make these other things God. But when I have this moment with my family, with my kids, and we're doing things that are standing in awe of the Creator, we are doing things that are allowing us to align ourselves and connect deeper to the Creator the way that I believe that we were meant to live. So whether it's running through the mountains, diving in the creeks, singing songs about peanut butter and being grateful for it, these are the things. Why would I put anything else? Why would I want to put anything else above any of that, knowing that that thing will not bring satisfaction, knowing that those things will not bring salvation, knowing that those things will not bring spiritual enlightenment? The thing that will allow me to grow in my spirituality will be coming to the place that I will allow God to be God, that God will be free to be God in my own mind, and I will be free, that I will be not confined, constrained by the sin, by the addiction, by the false gods of this world. Yeah, that's where the good stuff is, my friends. That's where like the peace and the calm in the middle of the chaos of life comes. Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message and to practice message to alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. It's this ongoing, continual practice. You've learned these steps and you now apply them. You know, the other interesting thing about this step is that, isn't this the same kind of thing that Jesus talks about in like the Great Commission? To go into all the world, bring the gospel message, tell people about what you've experienced. Isn't this the same thing that Jesus talks about when he gets into Acts before his ascension? Acts chapter 1, verse 8. Watch what he says. Jesus talking to the disciples, but you will receive the power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the very ends of the earth. He says, you'll receive my Spirit. You will have this awakening, this spiritual enlightenment, this growth, this deepening of your understanding of who God is. And Jesus says, carry this message, take this, the gospel, the good news to your town, to your country, to the world. And the good news is that there is a better way to be, one that allows you this deep, direct connection and aligning yourself with your Creator, the thing that your soul most desires. Maybe this idea even is witnessing, right? Maybe this idea of witnessing isn't as much about converting people as it is to simply helping others to wake up and introduce them to the very thing that they were already pursuing in the first place, that they just weren't aware of it. Step 12, I've had a spiritual awakening and I want others to experience the same thing that I have. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free. It is for freedom that Christ set you free. Go and do likewise. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I cannot change if there is a global pandemic. I cannot change if there is a recession. I cannot change if someone is willing or wanting to have some sort of spiritual awakening. I cannot change if somebody is going to choose Jesus. God, grant me the courage to change the things I can. I can change how I treat the people around me. I can continue to work on myself. I can continue to work on that relationship with God. I can live the kind of elevated life that will inspire the people around me. I can change my perspective. God, grant me the wisdom to know the difference. Will you guys say that prayer with me? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. It's a difficult one. It's so difficult to be at peace with that which I have no control over, but I like control. I'm more comfortable when I'm in control. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom, God, to know the difference.